Today we're going to talk about art in the Age of Enlightenment, 1750 to 1789. Okay, so there's a lot going on during this time. We've got the Industrial Revolution in England in the 1750s. We have a couple small revolutions. You might have heard of one in the US in 1776, and of course the one in France in 1789. So we've got a lot of things happening. There's a lot of ideas floating around. So we've got John Locke, who is the English philosopher. We've got his idea that all humans are born good and have a natural right to life, liberty, and property. It was changed in our Constitution, so life, liberty, and property. And then we have Jean-Jacques Rousseau and his ideas. His ideas have to do with the return to nature. His book was The Discourse on the Arts and the Sciences in 1750. So in the invention area, we've got electricity and oxygen are both discovered. We've got fabric mills popping up all over England. In fact, we have factories themselves popping up all over. And so this is actually going to change how people live and how people work. And we're going to see how that actually changes people's ideas of art as well. All right, so the two big things we're going to be talking about in this chapter is neoclassicism and romanticism. All right, so neoclassicism. This is the idea that the Greeks and the Romans were the bomb. They were the best. That's all we need to keep looking for is Greeks and Romans. So we've got also the idea that logic and science. And so we've got a lot of these ideas kind of wrapped up in it. And so we've got Voltaire being the big proponent of neoclassicism. On the opposite side, we have romanticism. So this is all about emotion and intuition, raw, unrestricted nature. Also, we have on the philosophical front, we have Rousseau and the idea that humans are born good. And so we have the idea that feeling, not rational thought, should be the leader here. So we've got neoclassicism and we have romanticism. The one thing that they agreed on is that Rococo was immoral, frivolous, licentious, you name it, they hated that. So that's the one thing they agreed on. All right, so here's our lovely map telling us what is happening in the world. So let's start off with Rome towards 1760, the font of neoclassicism, which basically means this is the beginnings of neoclassicism. All right, so we've got academies. Academies are starting to become very important, so kind of keep that on your radar. We also have something else, which is why I think neoclassicism it kind of gets its jump start, and that is we have some excavations. We have the excavations at the Acropolis in 1751, on Iona in 1764, Herculaneum 1738, and Pompeii 1748. So we've got Pompeii, Herculaneum. We've got these cities that were preserved all of a sudden being unearthed. And so we have this surge in popularity with the Greek and Roman stuff. Okay, so in this we have Johann Winckelmann, who was a German scholar. He published Reflections on the Imitation of Greek Art and Painting and Sculpture in 1755, and The History of Greek Art in 1765. So he was all about anything Greek. And so Winckelmann is one of the early art historians that you kind of keep seeing. And if you're a big fan of his, the Getty actually reissued several of his writings recently, so you can purchase those easily. Okay, so this painting by Anton Mings. So obviously the Greco-Roman element here is mythology. We've got Apollo surrounded by his muses here. The Apollo is painted to be Cardinal Albani. He's the one that commissioned this. This is on his ceiling. This is a fresco there. And surrounding him are his muses that just happen to look like several of his friends. So, very nice there. This one I included just because this is a portrait painting, but it's the idea that this person is going on a trip and getting to see these amazing things. And we've got the fountain here, and that's kind of the fountain of knowledge or fountain of culture. And so this is highly, highly symbolic. So it's not just a portrait. It's meant to be very symbolic in the nature. All right, and this engraving is by Hamilton, Andromache bewailing the death of Hector. So again, the literature of Homer and others is again becoming very popular. All right, so this one, the Piranesi, is under Rome towards 1760, the font of Romanticism. And you're saying, why? How in the world is this Romanticism? All right, well, it's because we have the idea that nature is overwhelming and people are tiny and insignificant. So, if we see here, we've got the little tiny person here, little tiny person here. Look at these little tiny people compared to the structure itself. So we have the awe of this monument here. And so that's what we're looking at here, is awe and sometimes even fear, considering these amazing things. So Piranesi, he was all about Romans. Winckelmann was all about Greeks. Piranesi was all about Romans. And he actually wrote a 4-volume book on Roman antiquities in 1757. Some of his works you'll sometimes see referred to as kind of a worm's eye view. So the idea is that you're very low looking up at this piece. Therefore, it looks even larger and more amazing than normal. All right, I want to introduce a concept. We'll talk a lot more about it later. And this is the idea of sublime. So I know when I say the word sublime, you might think sublimely happy, and you think of, hearts and happiness, etc., etc. But that's not really the way we're using the word sublime. We're thinking about this in the romanticism aspect. So in Civ, I know you guys talk about romanticism. And so sublime is a power, a vastness, infinity. It can be awe-inspiring in a good way, but it can also be awe-inspiring in the fact that it invokes fear. And so you have this idea coming out. And this actually started with Edmund Burke in 1756 with his philosophical inquiry into the origins of our ideas of the sublime and beautiful. Okay, so now we are going into neoclassicism in England. So this is the death of Germanicus. This is a marble relief. You can see that. So again, neoclassicism. So we're looking at these Greco-Roman stories, and we're even looking at the way that they portrayed the human body even. So this would not be out of place in a Greek or Roman setting. All right, Angelica Kaufman. So Cornelia presenting her children as her treasures. Also sometimes referred to as Mother of the Gracchi. So Kaufman, she is Swiss. She studied in Rome in the 1760s, moved to London in 1766, and became a founding member of the Royal Academy in 1768. And you're like, right, the English Royal Academy, they are with it. They are of a woman as a founding member. However, then they didn't do so good. She was actually one of only 2 women admitted to the Academy prior to the 20th century. 20th century, think about that. Women, of course, couldn't study the male nude. And women artists tended to do a lot of portrait painting, things like that. However, she was very unique in that she painted history paintings. History paintings, going back to that hierarchy we've talked about in the past, history paintings, they're up there. They're one of the top ones, and that's what she's doing. So that's kind of interesting. By the way, in comparison, the French Academy only allowed 4 women in the Academy at any one time. And so, again, this is still very a male-dominated field. All right, so let's talk about this piece. All right, we've got Cornelia. And so, who is Cornelia? How is this neoclassicism? Okay, so Cornelia, she was a real person. She lived in the 2nd century BC, and this was a popular history of Rome. So we know who she is, Cornelia Gracchus, and we know who she is because 2 of her sons, Tiberius and Gaius, became very well-known politicians. Okay, so what we've got here is she is saying, my children are my treasures. That's why she's got her hand outstretched, kind of pointing to her children there, while her friend here has her treasures in her hand and in the jewelry box on her lap. So that is her treasures. Also wanted to point out the little medallion there that the boy has on around his neck. That's a bulla, and those were very popular in the Roman times. And a bulla was meant to be like kind of a good luck charm to scare away the bad things, kind of like the evil eye would be. Benjamin West, The Death of General Wolfe. Another great history painting here. So Benjamin West, he was a Quaker born in Philadelphia. However, he moved to Rome in 1760 and then London in 1763. Again, another founding member of the Royal Academy in 1768. So this is kind of a contemporary history painting because what had happened, or that is being depicted, hadn't happened too far in the past. So what had happened was in 1759, so again, not far in the past, we had the French and Indian War. And so that is the setting for this piece. So this was a painting for King George III, but he wasn't a big fan of it. He thought it was way too modern and did not like this piece. So this is very much a little overdramatic here. We've got General Wolfe right here. Obviously, he is kind of dying or has just died. And we have everyone surrounding him, looking pained or hoping. We've got This guy here, with his hands clasped. But we also have this guy, this native over here. So that is the idea of the noble savage. That's an Iroquois man. And the idea of the noble savage was introduced by Rousseau, and we're going to see that in several works around this time. The idea it becomes very popular in Europe. In fact, natives themselves become very popular in Europe. They kind of get paraded around. Um, that's a whole nother thing. All right, Joshua Reynolds. Um, this is Lady Sarah Bunbury sacrificing to the Graces. So we've got the Graces here on the pedestal, and then we've got Lady Sarah Bunbury here. The three graces represent friendship, and specifically the three stages of friendship: giving, receiving, and the exchange of friendship between friends. So we notice that Sarah is not wearing a contemporary gown. She's dressed up very much in a costume, kind of a Greco-Roman costume we see here. And we've got the whole idea of the sacrificing to the Graces again, kind of an old concept, but she's kind of playing into this. The other lady in here is Sarah's lifelong friend, Lady Susan Fox Strangeways. And so we've got the idea of friendship continuing in this. And so this is actually another Sir Joshua Reynolds piece. This is Mrs. Siddons as the Tragic Muse. So I thought you might enjoy this. A little more dramatic here. So you can see a little different part of his styling. All right, so let's talk about how neoclassicism goes into architecture. All right, so I know I mentioned this at the time that you needed to know Palladio because he was coming back. Well, guess what? Here he is. This is the Palladian Revival. And so basically, everyone thinks, ooh, Palladio, he's pretty cool. We need to do that again. And so his works become very popular. And of course, what does his works look like? He has a lot of these, again, Greco-Roman elements. We have the temple front. We have that pediment here. We've got the columns with the Corinthian capitals here, the grand staircases. And again, remember Palladio's villa, that was the square with the dome on top. And that's basically what we have here with Lord Burlington and William Kent's Chiswick House near London. So Lord Burlington became an amateur architect after a trip to Italy and based this again on Palladio's Villa Rotunda that we've talked about. The windows are actually based on some he found in some Roman baths. And the staircase was based on one for the Wanstead house. There is Palladio's Villa Rotunda, if you're having trouble remembering what that looked like. So you can see definite similarities, very much copied after. The other one that you might be somewhat familiar with is the Thomas Jefferson Memorial. Frederick Olmsted, again, another big fan of Palladio. And so you can see that in there. And guess who else? Thomas Jefferson. You can see the influence there in Monticello. In fact, Jefferson openly said that he lifted his plans from some of Palladio's books. And again, we have the French style windows here. All right, so now let's move over to Bath, England. This is the Royal Crescent by John Wood the Younger. He actually worked with his father, John Wood the Elder, and they designed all of these kind of Roman buildings, a forum, a gymnasium, and a circus. Only the circus was built. And we've got, and the circus being the houses here. We have 33 attached houses, and they are meant to resemble basically the Colosseum, the way it's kind of subdivided. However, you will notice that it is kind of turned outside inwards. So instead of having it kind of the oval shape and the elements on the outside, we've done the opposite here in the Royal Crescent. So we've got an ionic order here, ionic order of column. These are colossal, which means they go up for more than one story. And you'll notice that the first story or the base here is meant to look kind of like a podium basement of a Roman building. This is the library in Kenwood in London. We've got a Roman barrel vault. We've got some Corinthian columns. We've got some elements from Palladio. We've got some classical elements. It's all very, again, drawing from the past here. Also, Peronese worked on this a little bit as well. Okay, so now we're switching gears and going into Romanticism. This is early Romanticism in England. All right, so we've got some ideas here. And I think it's very, very good to kind of start with these garden pictures. So the English garden, you might even hear it kind of referred to it as the English garden. It's very much influenced by the idea of Romanticism. So while they would plant, specific things, they wouldn't plant them in nice little rows that they would then keep trimmed. The idea is that it's kind of a planned wildness. So we'll have some of this over here and some of this over here. And the idea is to make it very natural, very much like it just, so all of this just happened to appear. Obviously, there's some planning involved, but the idea is to not see the planning, as opposed to those French gardens that we used to see surrounding the chateaus, where we have the everything is very much in rows and everything is perfectly manicured and trimmed. No, this has a wildness and naturalness to it. All right, so we've got a replica of a temple here in the back. So see right there, that little building is the replica of a temple of Apollo in Claude Lorraine's Coast View of Delos. And it's the waterways here the path around the lake. This is actually supposed to reference Virgil's Aeneid, and there's supposed to be this kind of allegorical journey of through Aeneas's underworld through this entire park. So this is the kind of things that we're talking about. So yes, there is some classical references here, but the romanticism element, it's kind of the wildness, the nature, let nature take its course. That's what we're talking about here. All right. The other thing that happens during this time is a Gothic revival. Okay, now some of you who took Art History 1 will remember that I made a big deal that Gothic lasted the longest in England, right? Um, well, it becomes part of their national identity. So English decides, and yes, I know it's ironic because it starts out very French, but the English decide that it's a almost nationalistic ideology of the Gothic is part of England, and so during this time we have a Gothic revival. It also becomes a revival because it just fits in so wonderfully with Romanticism and the idea of the sublime, which is both awe-inspiring and a little scary. So we have these, Gothic ruins and things. Very, very exciting. This is also the time period of we've got now it's a little bit later than the time period we're talking, but Victor Hugo's Notre Dame de Paris. We've got very much fits in with this Gothic revival and Romanticism there. Okay, so Strawberry Hill in Twickenham, England. This is right outside of London. So Horace Walpole decided to redesign his country estate in 1749. As you can see, it takes him 25 years to complete, so it takes him a while. And so we've got crenellation. Let's see, crenellation. There's that crenellation, kind of toothy looking thing. The crenellation that we used to see on castles. We've got tracery on the windows. We've got, look at that. Remember that ceiling of the Chapel of Henry VII at Westminster Abbey? Yep, there we've got it. That kind of lace doily look. Yeah, that's coming back. All right. So now let's talk about Romanticism in the paintings here. Now again, the idea of the sublime, very, very important. So Edmund Burke called the sublime the strongest emotion that the mind is capable of feeling. So that's really powerful. So again, it's the idea of awe, sometimes even terror. And we see that in this work by George Stubbs, Lion Attacking a Horse. So obviously, just in itself, a lion attacking a horse, pretty scary. We've got this powerful animal attacking another powerful animal, especially if you've ever been around a horse that's been semi-wild or been spooked and starts running. You know that horses can be very powerful too. So you've got these two powerful animals kind of locked in combat, though the lion obviously has a distinct advantage being on the horse's back. But we have a lot of other things going on. First of all, we've got, if I can get my mouse to show up here. Sorry, having some issues. Okay, there we go. So we've got the darkness of the cave, and so that's really kind of emphasizes the dark, and then we also have the dark storm clouds. So we've kind of got this dark and brooding feeling. And then we have the pure terror of this horse. And you can see his muscles are all taut, that he fears for his life. This is actually a series of 21 paintings that Stubbs does of a lion attacking either a stag or a horse. And so he was trying to find these natural events that would provoke this sublime reaction. Oh, and the other thing is, notice that the horse is white. The whole, got on a white horse, that is been something that's been around for a very long time. So we have the whole idea of goodness. So purity, goodness, the white horse, what he's being attacked by this lion that's being kind of enveloped by this darkness, which of course represents the evil. So very much a good versus evil going on here. Joseph Wright, this is Old Man and Death. So this is kind of an interesting one. This is comes from an Aesop fable. So we've got this old man, and he's exhausted from carrying this load of wood. He falls to the ground and he says, "Ugh, I'm just so exhausted. Death, take me." So this is when death appears, and death is, of course, being personified by the skeleton. And so we have this sense of doom with the skeleton walking towards the man. Well, of course, the man gets very scared and says, "No, no, no, I was just kidding. I'm fine, I'm fine." And so he starts to grab the wood back and saying, "No, no, don't take me." But of course, you notice in the background, we have these Gothic ruins that are covered by foliage and vines and trees. So we again that Gothic element is very popular here. And just so you know that Joseph Wright does some other different things here. Here's another one. This is an experiment on a bird in the air pump. He's very much interested in the Industrial Revolution that's happening, and so he does a lot um, dealing with that. This is actually one of a series of scientific paintings that he did to promote the Derby Scientific Organization, the Lunar Society. He was actually a member of the Lunar Society. This is 6 foot tall. Give you an idea of scale here. And so the idea here is that we have a scientist, and he is demonstrating an experiment, and the idea is to prove the idea of oxygen. And so we've got an air pump that creates a vacuum, and so we've got the bird and the glass vial there. And so we've got, when he closes it, then the bird will be deprived of oxygen, but he's ready to release and allow the oxygen in momentarily. And so it's kind of interesting. We've got different reactions. The 2 young girls. We have the older one who can't watch, but the younger one, she's fascinated by this. She's a little scared, but still wants to know what's happening. We have the reference to the Lunar Society in the moon there in the top right corner. The Lunar Society meets on the Monday following the full moon, hence the name. And here's one, again, the noble savage idea. The widow of an Indian chief watching the arms of her deceased husband. We have the idea that he has just died. She's sitting there. Of course, you will notice that she is very European, not native looking. But we have the chaos of the storm. And we have the storm that's kind of leaving, and we have all of this happening. She's also kind of the virtuous widow, seated by her husband's belongings. Another um, romantic, again, the idea of the sublime here. John Henry Fuseli, very much in the sublime category. This is Thor battering the Midgard serpent. So, again, taken from mythology, but not Greco Roman mythology, very much to the north, the Norse mythologies. Fuseli is very interesting. He's Swiss, um, and then moves to England. He is fascinated by these kind of sublime ideas. So, okay, this is a Norse tale. We have Wolf Skull devours the sun. His brother Hati eats the moon. And then we have darkness and earthquakes. And all of this is releasing Jormungand, the Midgard serpent, who is arising, as you can see, from the sea, and he's going to poison the land and the sky. So we must slay Jormungand. We have Thor, the god of thunder, but he's trying to take on the serpent. But we have Wotan, the king of the gods, cowering in the back of the boat. He is too scared to take this on. So kind of an interesting take on this. We don't have really Thor being quite the hero. I mean, he is in the fact that he's taking on this serpent. We have the idea that things are in very bad condition here. And by the way, Thor ultimately dies from the snake's poison, so we know that he does die from this encounter. Here's another one, the Nightmare. So we have this young woman who is asleep, or maybe even dead. It's kind of hard to tell on this couch or bed. And we've got an incubus, an evil spirit that is sitting on her chest. And the idea is that an incubus will come and have their way with women while they sleep. And then we have this really kind of freaky horse that seems to be poking his head into the room. And I have no idea why he's coming into this. And to make it even weirder, the back of this piece includes a portrait of a woman. And there is speculation that this might be a woman that he met in Zurich in 1779 on a train on the way to London. And he fell in love with her and proposed, and she turned him down. He did not take that well. So that makes an even more interesting turn on this. Okay, so Romanticism in Portraiture. This is Thomas Gainsborough. And so we actually have some Rococo elements that I might want to point out here. Kind of the fuzziness, the pastels. We have some of those elements still. This is a portrait of Mrs. Richard Brinsley Sheridan. Very British name there. She was born into the prosperous Sudbury manufacturing family. Oh, sorry, that was Gainsborough. Apologize. He studied in London with with some French Rococo painters. You can see that again in his style. Um, he moved to Bath and then later to London in 1774. He exhibited at the Royal Academy in 1769. He is most well known for his life-size full-length portraits. Mrs. Richard Brinsley Sheridan, she is a soprano. She married to the playwright of the School of Scandal, a comedy of manners. It was very popular. And you notice again the Rococo elements of background, the trees, her dress, very wispy. Even her hair has got that wispy kind of feel to it. But to give you an idea that not all his works are quite that Rococo. This is his version of Mrs. Siddons. Again, she was a very popular actress of the day. And so you can see the difference between Gainsborough's and Reynolds' versions of Mrs. Siddons.